Welcome to Olds Mob 455. Today we're going to try getting the Harley Davidson as a roller. Put the wheels together, get the fork together, and get it all sitting on the chassis so we can roll it in and out. So every time you do stuff and you paint it, I'll show you. I got paint in here, paint on there. Now the clearances are too tight and I can't get it together. So it's just a quick scraping of the paint. We'll have to blow it out and then see if she goes together.
We're going to use Loctite on these screws too. We're going to have to clean this really good so this crap doesn't get in the bearings. This is all I could find to fit on these screws. We actually had to disassemble a socket with that set screw there to get her to fit through.
Yeah.
We got the drum and sprocket landed.
I was telling them the story of how I was out in Sturgis in 1980 and I had a lowrider, and getting out of the downtown, which only used to be one little main street in Sturgis, now it's gigantic, but going back to the Buffalo Chip campground, this guy come alongside of me and he wanted to race, and I remember I shifted from first to second just with a full throttle and just bam, power shifted, and I had these wheels that were called Invader mags. Basically what it was just a round hub that was chrome, and then you had bolts on either side, and it held the disc on one side and it held the sprocket on the other. And when I shifted hard into second, all of a sudden the engine revved to hell and I'm going for third, trying to find any gear. It's just not going anywhere, and I'm like, what the hell happened? And I look back and the chain and the sprocket's going around, but I had snapped the bolts that went through the hub. I'm like, now what the hell am I gonna do? I push it back to this Quonset hut. Sturgis wasn't much, it was just a little town, and there was a Quonset hut that had a machine shop. And I ended up getting the axle out, and I lifted it up and got the wheel out from underneath. I think I had to lay it on its side, get this wheel out, and I roll this thing into this machine shop that's all dirtier than heck, and the studs were sheared off flat with the hub. And I'm like, this is gonna be costing me a fortune. He goes, I got all this other stuff I gotta do first. All right. So I had to wait around. He center drilled each one, center punched, and he drilled them out. And as he was reverse drill, he got all these studs out, and then he set me up with new Allen bolts that would hold it back together, and I had to put it all back together. But I was like thinking, this is gonna cost me a fortune. And I says, how much do I owe you? And the old geezer goes, $50. And I thought, man, what a nice guy. All right, so we're to the point of I cleaned all these. I don't know if it was a half a year ago or a year. We took this stuff apart, and as we took it apart, he said, I hope you remember how this goes back together. I go, it's like a bicycle with those different types of bearings, but we're gonna have to figure this out. See, you got a cage bearing. We kept the two separate. They were in baggies that we put it on. And this is the tube that goes through the rear wheel. And this is what they sealed water out with, and it's just a sintered neoprene or something like that. And then you got snap rings. We know those go at the very ends. You got one that probably faces this. This is the collar that the bearing would, well, I guess we'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, we're just going to grease her up good and screw her together. And this side obviously screws on the one side, so you kind of know how this goes. Just realized that snap rings go in there first and things.
So we put the cart before the horse. We got to take the drum off.
Had to go online, find a posting on this, but we spent, how many hours do you think we worked on this? 2, 3?
Yeah, just getting paint off, cleaning out the grooves for the snap rings, cleaning out the areas so this hub would go on. It's just paint gets in everything. And then tapping out the holes for all the little screws. Yeah, and then figuring out how all the stacked shims go. We're not using a dial indicator or whatever. Long time ago, I had a situation on a Harley where, I put the wheel back on. There's a tube that's in between the two bearings, and I tightened up the axle nuts in the back, get it centered up. Well, that tube was too short. So as I'm tightening it down, I was squeezing on the bearings instead of having some support in between the two bearings, and the bearings lock up to the axle. And I was married to the first wife at the time. She'd be hanging on to an adjustable wrench, and you see the whole axle, and we were way up north, and I'm riding like 20 miles an hour, and then we'd have to tighten it up again to get all the way home. That was a pain in the butt.
So we got our drum temporarily fit on here, and there's end play in this piece in here.
See, this goes in there. Once it's all tightened up, that'll keep those bearings from having any play.
Yeah, it's a really complicated system they got going on here. All kinds of different pieces.
And this goes all the way through. So that's the way it'll be. These will be the spacers on one side. These will be the spacers on the other. And
it's tightening up those sprocket bolts, and two of them cracked.
this is where somebody pumped grease into this whole freaking brake system.
Right, this was on there.
And you see a little grease, just a little shot of grease once in a while.
We got our brakes roughly put back together. May have to change spring position or arm position later. But just trying to figure out the big conglomeration pieces. You can see the speedo gear there. Our setup is damaged, and we're just going to skip it for right now, just to get this bike into the roller form. May revisit that later. You slide the axle in, just get it out of the way. So rear wheel is done.
This is another situation when you're painting, you just want to get it done at the time, and I didn't think I'd get that much in there, but primer, all that stuff, it accumulates, and then it becomes a hassle when you got to put the stuff back together. And the other one was we couldn't get the snap ring in. Then after I had to take this pick and pick it out, that accumulation of paint didn't allow the snap ring to go in there. And I had already previously gone in there, but I had to go through a second time and scrape it down to the bare steel. This front wheel has balls. There's ball bearings that you have to grease up and get them in place before you put the rest of the stuff in. It's like a bicycle. So here you got this big heavy bike. This is not a light bike. Everything is made out of cast iron and steel. And then you got these big freaking wheels. And this is the axle. Now, I don't know how, with that Springer, the weight is on the back bars and the front wheel is just pivoting up, but you would think the weight is on the wheel, right? When you're hitting a bump, it's all going through this little axle.
3/8 rod, I think that is.
Yeah, it's funny.
Got those races all polished up. The front wheel, with the ball bearings in there. Brake side front.
So when you get to the front wheel, you're probably looking at it like, what the hell did they do here? I wrapped some stuff around there so we could hang on to it. This is like a bicycle with ball bearings, and then you have to set the tension on these balls before you tighten up on this nut that'll hold it. And behind here, so as you put that thing through, there's a little, I'd call it a little titty, and then there's a keyway. And you put the washer on there, and there's two holes. You're using this, and then you tighten it up, and we thought, oh, let's go for firm feeling. But then when we tightened it up, it didn't roll. It would have been spinning on the axle, not the bearing. So we had to take it off and go back one, because the washer itself has little round that fit right around the titty. So we went back one, and that worked. So that's a time-consuming thing. Good enough. Simple brakes, You're just turning a cam. So put that. Do they fit in? Yeah. So I had a guy that had a Sportster. I'll show him this. He had a Sportster, and they didn't, it was so old, it was the old iron head. So they had to have new material put on here, and then they couldn't get the brakes on. So they usually bevel the leading edge, it still wouldn't go on. He says he took it to 5 dealerships, and they couldn't get the brakes to work. All I did is took that pin out, ground the thing a little bit skinnier so that the shoes came in, and it slipped on like here, and the guy's going like, "You're a genius." I go, "I can't believe you didn't have a mechanic that knew how to get the shoes in closer." That's it. So if I put, and it doesn't turn, if I let off, she goes like this. It ain't gonna stop very good. You know, this is 1949, there were no other vehicles on the road. You grab the brakes and you probably, it's only gonna go like 55. But I bet you it takes a while to stop too.